Mushoku Tensei Season 2 Part 1 was good, but I think it could have been much better. That is essentially how I would sum up my thoughts on this storyline of Mushoku Tensei that recently finished airing, and if the people I talk to or just the average viewer on my anime list are any indication, I think a lot of people would agree with that. I mean, you don't drop half an entire point in ratings unless something about this season isn't resonating with people the same way that it was before. Even prior to this season airing, I had always heard from source readers that coming up we would reach a school arc that a lot of readers weren't particularly happy with just because it turned into more of a slow-trotting slice of life than the high fantasy globe-trotting adventure drama epic that Season 1 Part 2 really committed itself to. However, I don't think telling me that had quite the effect that these people seem to be implying. Honestly, knowing that there was a slice-of-life, character-oriented storyline coming up only made me more excited in what this season would bring. I love slice of life. I love stories prioritizing characters and world building over concerning itself with needing to keep a plot or location moving from episode to episode. This is what made me fall in love with this series to begin with. The idea that you can spend essentially 8 entire episodes of the beginning of this grand isekai adventure essentially stuck in 2 major locations, with the bulk of the storytelling really coming down to its characters and their development. This is largely why I prefer Part 1 of Season 1 compared to Part 2. I just love how assured in itself it is, that it can spend so much time organically in these same locations and still keep it fresh and exciting and interesting. And at its best, when this season is operating at the level that I know Mushoku Tensei is capable of, Season 2 Part 1 recaptures that same magic, no pun intended. We spend nearly this entire core inside of this one magic academy, and it's not like this is Hogwarts we're talking about. This is a relatively small school, and the more time you spend here episode by episode, the more familiar and at home you become in this location. Similarly, this core is largely revolved around one central plotline, the story of Rudius overcoming the trauma that he experienced from Season 1 and slowly falling in love with his childhood friend Sylphie, and again, taking an entire core of the story to dive into these things, to let it breathe and let it develop organically until it eventually reaches its culmination. That is when this season is at its absolute best. These are the things that remind me what Mushoku Tensei is good at and how good it can actually be at them. However, in the midst of all that, you have something that brings this season down. There is one key failure that detracts from that really appealing core. One failure that makes an otherwise relaxing slice of life storyline less fun to watch. And just overall, one failure that prevents this season from reaching the heights that I think it otherwise could have. There's just too many goddamn characters, dude. Before you finish writing that comment, let me just say that the thing that I love most about Mushoku Tensei is how character-oriented it is. I love that really, when you really examine the story of Mushoku Tensei, it's almost tangential to what it is doing with the characters. Introducing and developing these characters and their dynamics is a lot more important than the actual story and the actual context surrounding Mushoku Tensei as a whole. Yeah, it's fun to examine the world building and the foreshadowing and all the plot points that are being set up, but when I really get down to what I love about Mushoku Tensei, the who is a lot more important to me than the why. It's with saying all of this then that I have to make it clear that when I say that there are too many characters, it's not that I'm saying that I want less character-oriented stories in Mushoku Tensei. I don't suddenly like those things in this series less than I did before. It's that I think within the constraints of this 12-episode anime season, you can really see the limitations of how much they're able to convey before it really starts feeling inorganic, and it just starts detracting from the stuff that this season is doing really well. Again, the core of Season 2 up to this point has been all about Rudius. It's about Rudius's development and Rudius's story of growing past his trauma and reconnecting with his childhood friend. And when we get to actually focus on those things, these are the parts that I absolutely fell in love with. There's something so magical about seeing Rudius given the opportunity and the ignorance to fall in love with a complete stranger, a guy no less, and have that eventually climax, no pun intended, into something genuinely meaningful and impactful for the entire future of the story. That's just so well done. It's such compelling and mature character writing, and it's something that is so rare that you have to treasure when you're able to find it in a series like Mushoku Tensei. However, throughout this wonderful storyline between Rudius and Sylphie, in order to keep things varied, keep the setting and the cast alive, and I assume to set up characters for the future of this series, Season 2 also has a ton of one-off episodes that aim to introduce and persist a bunch of other students within this special VIP class that Rudius has been inducted into. This, in concept, is not a bad thing. The special group of students in concept actually has a great purpose for Rudius and for being here in general, even beyond just having a bigger and diverse cast for him to interact with. The problem is that within this 12-episode framework, there really isn't enough time to actually do anything with them. When you really examine this season as a whole, this group of characters essentially have one episode to introduce them into the story, figure out what their whole deal is, and then promptly push them into the background, almost into non-existence, to then focus on the next one. And the result is that this group of characters and just this aspect of the season as a whole end up feeling incredibly half-baked when you compare it to the genuinely excellent writing surrounding the relationship between Rudius and Sylphie. And the real problem here is that you can't not write them into the story. These are all characters that you can assume will eventually be important, or at the very least come back in some capacity later on. You can't just cut one out for the sake of keeping things more focused and more cohesive. But at the same time, you also don't have the luxury of expanding on all of these characters the way that is likely done in the light novels. This season, more than any other moment in Season 1, really made me feel like I was missing out on so much context and so many additional scenes that really justify why these characters are even in the story in the first place. And it's because of what I mentioned earlier. There's actually a really interesting thematic through line in this season where Sylphie ends up feeling like she's getting left behind. Rudius has this clique of friends and students that he's hanging out with, and it continues to keep putting pressure on her to eventually reveal who she actually is. And I think that's great. I think this is a really compelling angle to take this group of students and to have their involvement actually fuel the main core of the story. But the problem with all of that is that the actual clique itself, the actual group relationship that Rudius has with these people, is just so incredibly underwritten that I wouldn't even blame somebody for missing that aspect of the story altogether. It's almost like a phantom of good writing that is shining through the source material, despite the adaptation failing so hard to bring it into the light. And this criticism about the lack of time to really expand on these things also extends to some of the broader storytelling and broader setup with these characters as well. Now, it's definitely nowhere near as big of a problem to me as the fundamentals are with their characterization, but it's also something that stood out to me among this season as just being weirdly contrived and out of place when I really think it would feel at least slightly more organic with more time to flesh it out. Stuff like this Demon King body, Nana Hoshi and her connection with Orsted, Cliff coming back from Melitian, in concept, all of these things are cool. It's cool to bring all of these characters into the story that have connections to things that Rudius has already encountered. But with the way the season is written with a new character storyline every single episode, it really does end up feeling weirdly forced and manufactured after a while, bringing these characters into the story so abruptly and so unceremoniously, all within this one incredibly small location. It just feels kind of weird bringing one important person after the next who all conveniently have these connections to Rudius. It is something that I'm ultimately willing to look past, especially when you get episodes as tense and as goddamn excellent as episode 9 out of these characters, but in the grander scope of the story, I do wish there was a bit more context leading into these things, and just the way these episodes are structured here definitely does not do it any favors. It also brings into question the way the Mushoku Tensei anime establishes these characters ahead of time, because the most obvious defense for having them all here is that they'll be important in the future. I can already hear the source readers telling me, you have no idea what these characters are going to be in the future. And you're right, I really don't. But it also makes me consider that we have already seen a few of these characters already in the series, characters that have had similar setups in the past, but weren't especially important when you consider how they're being used here. Cliff might as well be a completely new character in the context of this season. His appearance and his role in that season 1 OVA is almost completely irrelevant to anything that he does or says in this entire season. Not a big problem to me on its own, but it definitely does make me worry a bit about the future for these characters introduced in this season. Will a lot of their preciously little screen time still not ultimately matter to the future of the story? Will they basically function as new characters when they eventually come back? It depends on how they're written in the light novels, but also it depends on how the anime eventually adapts them and what it chooses to cut out. On a more positive note though, I do want to praise something that I think most people entered this season ready to doom and gloom over before watching even a single second, and that would be the production. Yes, the animation and production is nowhere near the standard that season 1 set. Yes, this season almost certainly would have been better off being pushed a season or 2 back. But when I really examine this season as a whole, and ignore some of the anomalies and weaker episodes that occasionally popped up, this is still a very well realized series in my opinion. I think you'd have to be pretty spoiled from season 1 not to realize that Mushoku Tensei season 2 still looks better than most anime that are coming out today. The background art and aesthetic is still absolutely beautiful, the animation pops off when you need it to, and the most important thing to me, the direction is still able to accentuate everything that it needs to. This season has even more intimate scenes and situations between its characters, and the direction maybe does an even better job at really conveying that aspect of the series. It's such a wonderfully romantic and sexually tense storyline, and I think the production side of things, the team over there who are bringing this story to life, really did an excellent job of conveying it visually, and I have no doubt that they will continue to in Season 2, Part 2. And that's the big exclamation mark that caps off the end of this Part 1. If you know me, you know that I am a sucker for good endings and good conclusions, and I think this Season 2, Part 1 not only ended on arguably the greatest episode of its entire run, but also just gets me really excited for where this season is going to go now, both in Season 2, Part 2, but also even further down the line in Season 3. We have a marriage between Rudius and Sophie that will have massive ramifications for the rest of the entire series. The political stuff with Ariel is finally coming together in a way that's exciting and interesting, and it seems like we're finally getting back on track and potentially even finishing this plotline of Rudius finding his missing mother. The stuff from here on out is the stuff that I have heard Mushoku Tensei really praised for. But it also makes me sad because I do think that this season could have been up there with the best Mushoku Tensei has ever been. There's glimpses of absolute greatness within this season if it was just able to either extend its runtime to actually justify the number of episodes it used for its supporting cast, or just reined it in just a little bit and focused on the stuff that's actually worthwhile with Rudius and Sophie even more. I think this season could have been something truly special. Not like it even matters saying all of this at this point. All we can do now is wait and see if Mushoku Tensei Season 2 Part 2 lives up to the hype. However, if you actually listened to this entire video, are a huge Mushoku Tensei fan, and didn't like how mean I was being the entire time, then I would highly recommend watching a new video that I just uploaded on the main channel about the maturity of Mushoku Tensei Season 2. That video is pretty much 100% focused on all of the stuff that I did really love in this season, and it might appeal to you more if you just want an echo chamber to reinforce all of the opinions you already have. Also, I need to deeply, sincerely apologize to everyone who is keeping up with the Mushoku Tensei weekly reviews. I know I said they might be a little bit more inconsistent, but obviously not being able to cover any episode past episode 7 was definitely not what I had intended, and it's pretty clear to me that I just don't have time for weekly reviews right now, and I'm just really sorry for letting you guys down. Will that change by the time Season 2 Part 2 comes out? I have no idea. It's really hard to say for me right now, but honestly, after watching this part of the anime, I'm kind of 95% of the way convinced to just making it a goal next year to read the entire Mushoku Tensei light novel. Some might be happy to hear that, some might be upset. I know a lot of people really like when channels stay anime only. Rest assured, if I do end up doing that, I'll try to make more videos about it either here or on the main channel, and of course, I will be talking about it thoroughly as I read my way through on the Discord server linked in the description. So if you're interested in chatting with me about that or just hanging out in the community, I do highly recommend stopping by there. Like the video if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, but mainly go subscribe to the main channel because that's where I'm going to be putting most of my effort and content. I hope you guys are having a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video.